Hello friends, welcome to episode 119 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
It's been Michigan weather again.
It's been Michigan weather again. We went from pretty reasonable to 90 and humid and thunderstorms
With 80-mile-an-hour gusts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's been a fun August already.
Yeah.
But so here, last weekend we had Session 0 for my Savage Worlds game.
We did. That's right.
Thought it went really well.
I think so as well. I think everybody hit the numbers well as far as like understanding.
I don't think anybody walked out of there disappointed with how the character converted over from D&D.
Yeah.
And we did kind of like a simulated combat to kind of get everybody used to just the basic mechanics of things and stuff like that. And,
right.
Talked a little bit about some of the house rules we're using. I think it was really good. Really good afternoon.
The only thing I will say to you, as a fellow storyteller, was you didn't do a break. And that is a common problem with Session Zeros.
Well, I don't know. We kind of had a break like the entire afternoon because we weren't really like on doing like anything. I mean, it was just making characters.
I watched the table. Everybody was engaged at the table trying to figure out what to do with their character, except for one of the players who had already pre-worked.
Two of them.
Right. Yeah. But at the end of it, I literally was... I had spoken with Vic, who was doing her character, and she's like, I didn't even realize how hungry I was at the end. I mean, we had like snacked and stuff, but like, that was like a gaming session. It just kept going. And I'm like, I'm watching you be casual and just enjoying watching everybody get their stuff together and be excited about it. And I'm watching everybody like, oh, okay, this, and then this. Like, we were all taking exams, and you were the teacher or the proctor.
Okay, that's fair.
And it was a different experience. And I went, I wonder if this is what it's like during other Session Zeros that I've ran, where I really don't, I just let people do what they want.
Mm-hmm.
I probably should be aware of that. That might be something to be aware of.
Okay.
So...
I didn't think we ran that late, and we had snacks and stuff like that. I just kind of figured everybody was okay. Maybe I misjudged the room.
No, I think it was that everybody was into it. So it was like a classic game where everybody's buried into it that they forget.
And then at the end, you're just like, and once you have that moment of self-awareness,
right,
where you don't have something else occupying your mind, you're like, oh, I'm tired and I hurt and I've got a headache and I haven't eaten in 8 hours.
I watched one of our players who we kind of keep an eye on because she sometimes fades, or they sometimes fade quickly. Fade. And I was like, oh, they're going down. They're going down right now.
Yep.
They don't even realize that they shouldn't be walking out the door.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was one of those situations. But other than that, I think it was fantastic. It went a lot more smoothly. I think there was a lot of good table discussion about, like, is this more my character or is this more my character? Mm-hmm. And that's always an interesting thing to do versus, like, building the best version of your character.
Yeah.
Or leaning into things that are your character.
It was neat seeing everybody at the table get excited about which hindrances they were going to pick for their character.
Yeah,
I'm looking at two of them. You'd think they were discussing special abilities or magic spells or something. Like, I don't know if I want to be delusional or if I want to be devoted. Like,
what's the difference is, And then it went back and forth and back and forth. So.
No, it was great. It was really great. So.
Yeah.
But we have a system spotlight.
We do.
Second Tuesday of the month, like we always do. So tonight we're going to be talking about Wyrd games through the breach setting.
Now, I had put this one on our docket because I was interested in it, because I was interested in a Malifaux originally, but I never got into it, never did anything with it, heard a lot about it, heard that there was all kinds of weirdness that happened with it. Mm-hmm. Weirdness, funny that. But then when I heard the RPG came out, I was like, oh, the storytelling elements that I'm really interested in, I'll get into that. Again, didn't get into it. Mm-hmm. Too many other things going on in my life, because it came out, I want to say we didn't get the actual game till later, the RPG.
Because
it became, 2005 was when things started?
2005 is when Wyrd Games was incepted.
So it's when they kind of started pulling things together.
Yeah, Nathan Caroland and Eric Johns formed Wyrd Miniatures in 2005, and it was around 2009 that they then made their skirmish game.
Yeah,
using their they're using their miniature line called Malifaux.
Right.
And that was kind of where the whole setting came from, and such like that. They stitched all the story together and such like that, and made this really great skirmish game out of it.
Yeah.
Through the Breach was actually kickstarted in 2013.
Okay, that's what I'm remembering. Okay.
Yeah. And so the first edition of it came out in 2013. The second edition of it came out in 2017.
Yep. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
They also recently, in 2017, kickstarted another game called The Other Side, which I guess is a little bit bigger, like a company-sized game, like 40 to 50 minis on either side.
Lord.
It's set in the Malifaux universe, but not in Malifaux. It actually takes place on Earth.
The other side of the Breach.
Exactly, the other side of the Breach from where all their other stories take place. And it's kind of this like Lovecraftian, Shadow over Innsmouth, sea creatures and Lovecraftian horrors.
Yeah, and I think that's what really intrigued me about the whole world is like a couple of friends kind of started showing me the minis and stuff and the cards, and there were decks involved, and I was like, okay, so this is a miniature game with decks and story of a breadth that is kind of impressive.
Oh yeah.
And I got into I started looking into some of the factions that they had at the time, because I really liked the artful look of it. It was very steampunk, but it was also very fantasy. It kind of hit in my head a little like Star Wars, in the sense that it was fantasy, like high fantasy, wrapped with steampunk.
Yeah.
You know. And I could easily see it becoming, steam opera or something like that, which it very much is.
Sure, yeah.
It's horse opera in its finest form. It's the frontier.
Oh yeah, very pulpy.
Yeah, you've got an oppressive faction, effectively, that's commanding and controlling everything. You've got rebellion. You've got local factions who are being asserted against.
You've got frontier politics and justice.
Yeah,
otherwise known as no frontier politics and justice.
Right. I mean, it is very much all that you need to have that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But at the same time, these amazing looking minis, a slightly different way to look at some of the traditional races as well. Which I thought was kind of neat. Like, not to say that goblins often aren't.
Well, they're not goblins in this. They're gremlins.
Yeah, which a different way to look at it. I mean, they're like, but they're like, are those gobos? No, those are gremlins, and they live in the swamp.
And they are rednecks, and they have a whiskey golem.
Yeah, which was fantastic. I love that. So let's talk a little bit about the universe. So I'm going to start on the other side of the Breach, on Earth. So Earth, and it is known as Earth, right?
Yeah. It is an alternate universe of Earth. Like they talk briefly about the sorcerer kings of Egypt back in the old days,
and magic is a thing. It's part of our world, but not really as much anymore because we've dried it up.
Or something. We're not really sure why, but in 1787, magic just started to wane.
Yeah.
And like even the most potent Gandalf style sorcerer who could bring down mountains on things could barely get a spark to come out of their wand.
Right, which is, I mean,
it was scary.
I see it akin to us having like a cataclysmic solar storm that wipes out all electronics.
Oh yeah.
Like what do we do? Like how do we get things going again? So
the greatest magical minds in Earth got together and put all their heads together, did a bunch of research, did a bunch of magic to try to like search out, like divine where another way of getting magic could be, and they found this alternate reality that kind of bordered on our own, that had a ton of magic in it, and they thought, hey, let's just form a breach. Keep that word in mind.
Yep.
Between our world and theirs.
Yeah.
So they did that. It blew up. It killed most of the most powerful wizards on Earth.
Yep.
But we had this breach open between us and there. So we travel through it, and we find, instead of a wild, untamed wilderness, there's a city. Like a fully formed city. Very recognizable. There are stores and
people
well, there's no people though.
That's right. The first time there's no people.
There's literally nothing there. There's no sign of a struggle. It's not like everybody got up and left or anything. Not like they It was just like they just vanished.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, we still don't really know what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, after exploring a little bit, we kind of realized, okay, maybe it's safe, and we start realizing that the magic here comes from this stuff called soul stone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this white stone that is filled with magic, and you can use it kind of as a big battery,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they call it soul stone is because as it dies, it slowly turns black, but if someone dies near a soul stone, it will recharge it.
Yeah.
So this went on for a while. We mined all sorts of soul stones.
Stuff was coming back through the breach.
Brought them like steam rail back through the breach to Earth and stuff like that. We made all sorts of like techno magic, putting these soul stones, like I said, like batteries into machines and stuff. Our entire culture in that 100 years changed to running off of soul stones.
Mm-hmm.
When all of a sudden one day in 1887, 1897. Nope. I'm wrong on that. That's 10 years later, 1797.
There you go.
So from 1787 to 1797, we mined all these soul stones. There's a huge battle that takes place because the native inhabitants, called the Neverborn, decide that they are
done with this
pissed
crap.
that we're there and we're mining all their stuff and stuff like that, and they want us gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quick, it's very violent. And right before the breach slammed shut, like permanently, a torso of a body was tossed through it with a word written into the flesh: "Ours."
That's kind of a blatant statement at that point.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, they may well have just written "F off" on it,
Yeah.
and slammed the door on them.
So at that point, Earth basically goes back into superwar because now we have a finite resource again.
And like starving wolves.
Yep.
Like starving wolves just went at each other's throats for all these resources.
Mm-hmm.
So this happens for about 100 years or so.
Right.
1897 rolls around.
Mm-hmm.
The breach spontaneously just reopens. And that's that.
Mm-hmm.
The guild, who had run the mining operation before, had been keeping an eye on the breach, thinking that possibly someday they might find a way to reopen it and such like that. And when the door went back open, some explorers went through very tentatively. All the signs of battle were still there. Like, it looked like there was a huge battle that took place, but none of the people were there.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't find any bodies, anything like that. And so slowly but surely, like a beachhead, taking little bit by little bit, slowly gained a foothold, and of course not making the mistake of being complacent about their safety ever again.
Right.
Set up their kind of like military-style stronghold, grip on the place, and assured everyone's safety, and they got their mining operation back up. Current timeline is 1901.
Yeah.
And 4 years after the opening of the breach.
Yeah.
And the city of Malifaux is
back up
back
up and operational. And it's not to be confused with that like 100-year war kind of happened. And probably up to the relatively recent was still. So there's still a lot of tension. There's still a lot of strife going on.
Oh, sure.
And the only controlling entity in this enterprise that's basically now has a stranglehold on all of magic, effectively, is this guild.
Is the guild, exactly.
They're the spice miners. They're controlling all of the movement of this magic.
Well, there's a lot of themes available in Malifaux, and that's one of the things I think I really like the most about it, is that there are like five very prevalent themes, and so you can go in a lot of different directions with your storytelling. So first off, you've got the wild frontier. I mean, outside of the city of Malifaux, this is all undiscovered country.
Yeah.
I think there's like some nearby towns and villages and mining encampments, but like it's got that very Wild West feel to it, of the untamed wilds and who knows what's out there. On top of that, this is an alien world.
Yeah.
Soulstones, the Neverborn, gremlins, those are just a few of the things that the weirdness as you'll find out there.
Right. There's a lot more to see.
Exactly. And this is a world that is potently filled with magic, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But suffice to say, it is so magical that like people who cross through the breach sometimes spontaneously develop superpowers. But someone who might be like the most tame hedge witch who can barely get a flower to sprout might suddenly become an arc druid by walking over there, you know?
But also, like, we have a rich history that's completely a question mark. Like, we know there was a battle that closed the breach. We don't know what's happened since then. Did people survive? Are they in hiding? Are there notes and memories?
Hell, what even happened before that? Malifaux, the city, was here when we came through the breach the first time 100 years ago.
Did somebody else come through a breach?
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Where did the city come from? What used to be here before we found it, you know? The Embers of Magic, which like I was just talking about there, a lot of that is, that's a pretty big theme there, is how magic works so much differently in Malifaux than it does on Earth. And people making really great, almost like scientific, you know, Industrial Revolution style discoveries in the fields of magic.
Right.
Just over in Malifaux.
Yeah.
And so that's a really big theme in the game. Especially between like the Arcanists and the Guild. But again, we'll talk about them later.
Yeah.
And then finally, and I quote, "It's all guild business."
Yeah.
Because over all of this, you've got this oppressive company, and you've got this like sort of robber baron capitalism, you know.
Well, it's akin to the East Asian Trading Company in many ways. That even though you may have had this empire that was sitting behind them, they knew the power was within this trade.
Oh yeah.
And so they just waited. They bided their time. They prepared. They tried to breach, you know, and did their own things. And as soon as they were ready, they were the only ones truly ready to walk through that breach and prep it. And because of that, it's theirs. They own it. It's theirs.
Also, they control the entire trade of soulstones.
Yeah.
So, and where are you going to get your magic?
Yeah.
Where else?
Yeah.
Not Earth.
Yeah.
You know? And the guild is always like it's kind of a weird balancing act, because on one hand, you know, you'd love to paint them as the oppressive figures who rule with an iron fist, but man, if Malifaux ain't safe and we haven't been kicked out yet by the Neverborn, they did it once, they haven't done it a second time.
Right.
You know,
they're still there too.
There is law in Malifaux.
Right.
You know, it's not the lawless frontier that you would think it is. You don't get, you know, mugged the moment you come through, and that's because the guild keeps, you know, runs a tight ship. They do rule with an iron fist, but in a certain way, that's kind of a good thing for people. But, you know, there's obviously downsides to it.
Well, let's break down some of the factions.
Sure.
Let's talk about the guild a little bit. I mean, you're right. It is peace at any cost, because that's all of their bread and butter. They can't have that breach break down again. I'm sure they're preparing for it. They're studying for it. They're doing everything they can to not let that happen.
I'm sure their contingencies have contingencies, yeah.
But they also have their own security forces. They have their death marshals who go out there, the Neverborn hunting group, the witch hunters who are going after unregistered mages.
Yes.
And or dangerous ones.
Because you're allowed to cast if the guild thinks that your magic is safe enough and they let you. But
I mean, you are a weapon at that point.
Yeah. And you're an element of chaos in their carefully, you know, carefully curated piece. And so they don't want loose cannons running around. But unfortunately, like I said, Malifaux doesn't often give you that option.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people who come over here and find that their magical talents are completely unhinged. But there's also, like, and we'll talk a little bit about the Resurrectionists later, but there's also outside influences that try to sneak magic in.
Yeah. Well, okay, so under the guild, working for the guild, if you will, but still independent, you've got the mining group.
Well, yeah, okay, so they're the Miners and Steamfitters Union.
Right.
And this is basically, they're kind of the people who, like, think of it like the UAW.
Right.
You know, standing against the corporate executives at the big three.
Right.
You know, they work for them, but at the same time, there's kind of an us versus them relationship where they're trying to stop the guild from being able to just, you know, run everything.
Right.
And on the backside, they're also running an underground railroad for unregistered mages.
Well, of course they are. They're going to control anything underground. They're the almost the mob that sits underneath the mob.
Yes.
That's in this world, which is the straight man, the guild, which is not the straight man, really. It's funny. The guild is the mob of the other world.
Yeah.
On the other side of the breach. Here, they're the straight man.
Right.
With the Arcanists right underneath them as the mob, honestly creating the balance and control.
Yep. Running black market soulstones to people and dealing heavily in techno magic. So if you're really into like the steampunk elements of things, of like, putting a soulstone in a little mechanized spider and setting it loose, that's where you're going to find it, is the Arcanists. You've got your outcasts,
which are kind of just the unaffiliated, right?
Yeah, they're kind of just unaffiliated mercenaries. In a lot of ways, you run into a very eclectic group under the kind of the outcasts banner.
Because they can be anything from just like your typical wandering gunslinger kind of thing,
all the way right up to a monstrous, like, living. How do you define Killjoy?
Oh boy, yeah,
he's,
okay.
Kind of like Frankenstein's monster, like a World of Warcraft abomination, Pudge from Dota, if you've ever played that.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally anything you can think of.
Runs around with a meat hook and a cleaver.
The made man, if you will. So, yeah. And all these things are allowed there, and they're watched over by the guild, because they're not doing anything necessarily wrong. But it's still a little bit of a West element.
Well, sometimes the guild even employs them, you know, depending on what their needs are, because they're disposable, they're plausible deniability
business. Yeah.
So then there's the Resurrectionists, and this is the in the Malifaux skirmish game. This is the people that I play. I've actually got two crews. I've got the Dr. McMorning crew, and I've got the Molly Squidpidge Take Back the Night crew.
Oh boy. The names.
Oh, I love Molly Squidpidge so much, but. So the Resurrectionists are what they call necromancers over in Malifaux. And, a lot of the necromancers, like, you can't... So first off, necromancy doesn't exist on Earth.
No.
So this was all new to us when suddenly people started raising the dead, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot of different ways of doing necromancy, There's the, like, tormenting spirits into, rising in incorporeal ways. You've got, people who stitch corpses back together, like Dr. McMorning, who is the he actually doubles. He moonlights as a resurrectionist because he's actually the guild's medical examiner.
Wait. The nurses that he's got around him are all made ladies, if you will.
Yeah,
like they're made better.
Yeah, they're undead constructs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. McMorning, like I said, he's actually the medical examiner for the guild. And sometimes they send him out to hunt resurrectionists because they figure he'd know more about it, and not knowing he is one himself.
Of course he does.
Of course he does, yeah. And then you've got other people like Seamus, who is like a serial killer.
Yeah.
Who has murdered an entire brothel full of women and is walking around with his rotten bells, as they're known. But necromancy is not learned by, like, books. It's whispered to you,
like a god or a spirit or a power.
Yeah, it's called
edging into your mind.
They just call it the grave spirit. And so you may just show up in Malifaux and you'll just start hearing these little voices telling you, hey, try to cast this spell. Look at that corpse, do you think you could make it walk? And it drives you a little nutty, obviously, but yeah, that's necromancers are chosen, not learned,
Right. Now I said that there was you've got your Arcanists, but there is another criminal group.
Oh yeah, and this one's more organized crime.
Okay.
Like the Arcanists are more like a black market, a underground railroad sort of thing. But the 10 Thunders, which come from the Three Kingdoms, the Orient, as you were, they actually have their own breach back over on Earth, and have basically been infiltrating Malifaux through this back door that they've got, and they've got spies everywhere. They absolutely are the mafia, like the Triad, basically, And they've got some real powerful like casters and martial arts on their side.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they've got eyes everywhere. Like
what tropes do they employ for that group? Because I'm not familiar with them.
The Ten Thunders is kind of plays off of that like the Chinese railroad workers and such like that.
Okay.
Initially.
Okay.
But also pulling in a lot of those like Yakuza and Triad sort of influences.
Okay. Okay.
With the with that like Wild West Victorian bent to them.
Gotcha. Okay.
You got your gremlins,
which we talked about, the Bayou Boys. Yeah.
Bayou Boys, Bayou Rednecks. But they're really good at mimicking human behavior. Like, they weren't like that before humans showed up.
But now they are.
And now they're kind of taking on those tropes because they see our civilization and they're trying to make theirs like ours.
Which I think makes a lot more sense for the Bayou.
Yeah.
Again, it's a completely alien race adapting aspects.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that they don't know what they're doing. They're just doing what they feel is an aspect that they want to follow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
And then there's the Neverborn, the bad guys.
Yeah.
Now, you can play them in the skirmish game.
The bad guys. That's so black and white in this.
It
kind of is.
Nightmares made flesh, buddy.
They're definitely antagonists.
I mean, they've definitely got a lot of their own motivations, and some people might say that they are fully, within their right to be very pissed off that we've invaded their land and started mining it.
Yeah.
There's definitely some like what's the word I'm looking for there? Colonization, sort of feels there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they are nightmares made flesh. They're about the closest thing to demons we have in the setting.
Right. They have a feel of it, but they are not demons.
Yeah, they're more manifestations of our nightmares and fear.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of them take on the aspects of boogeymen from lore and other creepy dolls and stuff like that.
Right.
So I mean, obviously without humans there to kind of have those things, they wouldn't have appeared like that.
Right.
So obviously there's some sort of a reflection of us.
Yeah.
But they're like this very dark, very negative reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of feed off of that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also very pissed we're here.
So all of that wraps around I'll use the word lightly, complex system that is only complex because you're having to explain how to use a deck.
Yep.
As a fate.
Deck of cards.
Right.
Yeah.
And not just one. Not just one deck of cards.
Yeah, kind of 1 1/4.
Yeah. I mean, but
we'll call it 2.
Yeah, we'll call it 2 because it plays out differently, and technically, which is really neat, they made custom decks for players that are unique. They're not unique in the sense that they're not a playing deck. They're unique in the sense that the art and illustrations and design lilt toward a certain faction.
Right. Well, also the suits on the decks of cards are different. They so Malifaux uses analogous but unique suits for their cards.
Right.
So rams instead of hearts.
Mm-hmm.
You've got masks instead of diamonds, tomes instead of clubs, and crows instead of spades.
And the jokers are part of the deck.
And the jokers are very much part of the deck because that's where you get your critical fails and critical success.
Yeah, it's funny that we're talking about this right after Savage Worlds, like going into Savage Worlds and discussing it, because I wouldn't say there's similarities, but there's definitely some points that they cross over in the way the mechanics play out.
Yeah,
I would say.
Absolutely. So at its core,
if we can make this simple,
characters are. You want to talk about character creation? Or you want to talk about the Fate deck first? I think probably character creation.
I think character creation because we can get that out of the way pretty fast, honestly.
Right. I mean, it's pretty.
It's neat.
it's so. Your characters have aspect, skills, and talents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those are attributes, skills, and feats or edges. You call them by a lot of names, but basically it's your typical thing. Your attributes define your raw descriptor of your character. Your skills are the things you've picked up along the way. And your talents are fun tricks you can do that are kind of unique to you.
Right.
Okay. Now, how you create characters, though, this one is very unique. I've never seen a character creation like this.
Okay.
So you take a deck of cards, and you lay a tarot spread called a Crossroads Tarot. Now you use a regular deck of cards, not a tarot deck.
Right.
Though I'd love to see what happens with a tarot deck.
It's a deck.
Yeah, you might be able to do it, actually.
You probably could. If you're good enough to translate, you'll be just fine.
But so you lay out one card in the center, and then you start one to the left, one above, one to the right, and one below. So you end up with a plus of playing cards.
With one in the center, yeah.
Right. So the one in the center is your station card.
Okay.
Okay. This represents your birth circumstances. This will basically just kind of describe your character's upbringing. Were you an academic of sorts, or were you a burglar, or were you a necromancer, or
right?
What were the circumstances of your being here, essentially? Next one over on the left is your body card. This one determines all of your physical attributes. Now, the suit doesn't really matter, but the number on it does.
Right.
The higher the number on it, the less spread out and more balanced the numbers it will offer you. Now, the cool thing is that this is basically point buy.
Yeah.
So it's going to give you a handful of numbers. Now, instead of, and all those numbers will total up to the same thing. So I'm getting the same amount of numbers as you are.
Right.
But I might get 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, and you might get 2, 3, 3.
Right. There you go.
There you go. So depending on what number you get, they may be more spread out. They may be more focused. You've got your root skills go up on the top. These are skills that you learned when you were growing up. You learned them more or less by circumstance.
Right.
And it's the reason they differentiate. Like, what skills would you have learned looking at what your origin was, what your station card was?
Right.
Growing up on, say, like, the mean streets of Chicago before you crossed through the breach.
Right.
As an urchin, what would you have picked up?
Right.
And that gives you a bundle of skill points. Again, it's all the same numbers of skill points, so it's always going to be, one character will always be balanced against another, but you may end up with, 2 3s and a 2, or you may end up with, 1 1 1 1 1, across the board. It's like master of none, jack of all trades.
Right.
Your next card on the right is your mind card.
Right.
That defines your physical attributes. It works just like your physical card, only it goes into your mental attributes.
Right, which is simple enough.
And then your bottom card is your endeavor skills. And these are cards you've picked up by choice as your profession.
Gotcha.
Now, your station just defines where you came from, but you can always grow out of that. You can always, depending on what sort of leverage, what sort of story you're trying to tell with your character, this is really where you start picking up like your professional skills. Who you are now.
Yeah.
Now, you said all that. You get a couple extra points to spend here or there just to kind of round out your character as you like. And then you do the fun part.
Which is neat. Because you've got the cards laid out. You don't remove them.
You look at that spread, and you divine fate. Now, the same charts that tell you how many points you get for what value of card that you've got in those specific locations also have a snippet of prophecy.
A bit of text.
Just a little bit of text. Completely out of context. Once you're done getting all your numbers jotted down, you write down your prophecy. You start with the last card you dealt, and you go in reverse order all the way back to your station card at the end. And you read the prophecies next to the value of those cards.
Right.
The value in suit.
So, like what you were just doing with the layout, it would read something like, because again, these are all random, effectively.
Yeah. I threw a random spread just so we'd have something
and I love this. It's
like,
so as you walk the lonely road, your dance will draw the sleeping eye, and witches will wait for you at the crossroads. The sand of waters will make you clean, and she is part gore and part kin. Now, what does that mean?
I don't know.
Nobody does.
I don't know.
The storyteller, hopefully,
so cool.
Has a clue of certain aspects of it. But as a storyteller, even I could say that could mean any number of things as the story rolls on. But what's neat is that each one of those lines comes into play as your character moves through the story.
Yeah, it's one of your paths to progression is fulfilling your prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
You're fulfilling your fate. And that's kind of where this whole thing comes down to, is your characters are referred to as fated.
Right.
The deck is called the Fate deck.
Mm-hmm.
And any test, like, seeing if you succeed or fail, is called a Duel of Fate.
Right.
And the storyteller is called a Fate Master. I think there's a theme going on here.
I feel this. I'm feeling this. I'm not sure, but I feel that it's something...
They might be trying to say something.
Correct. Something about drama, probably. Yeah. So, but I like that as you move ahead with these lines,
mm-hmm.
and you're progressing in the story, you can say, well, I was tossed off of the train, but nobody else was, and doused into the sands.
Yeah.
And when I came back up, I was okay. Like, I survived it. So I guess the sands of waters made me clean. Like,
I guess you did. Yeah. That's a good interpretation.
Because I survived the fall, unscathed, because I made my rolls, but, like, that's weird. Like,
mm-hmm.
And now I'm like, I wasn't with the group when they pulled into town, so now I can get them out.
Right.
Because I was not part of the heist. So... like, you can blend that into your story as you go, or the storyteller can blend it in as you go.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that aspect of it, because prophecies are always a little open.
Yeah, it's interesting because we always talk about, like, character backgrounds and histories and stuff like that, and, giving plot hooks to your storyteller by telling them, what NPCs or what, and this is like, give me a cryptic prophecy about your character that's gonna come true during this,
right.
And it writes it for you, so it's a really interesting way of doing that. And it becomes part of the advancement too, because when you like fulfill or deny part of your prophecy, it's a chance for advancement. And that is what actually gets us into talking about advancement, pursuits. And pursuits are very cool because they are like, but also entirely unlike character classes.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal of a pursuit is that it is a temporary character class that you will assume for the span of an adventure. The idea being that you will want to change these often.
Mm-hmm.
You are encouraged to.
Mm-hmm.
You're encouraged to take a pursuit that is the most applicable to the adventure at hand.
Right.
So don't think for an instant here where I'm saying, oh, you can juggle your pursuits around, that this is some sort of like cheesy, min-maxy sort of thing.
Mm-mm.
They outright tell you, like, no, seriously, change your pursuit. The storyteller should tell you at the beginning what style of story they're going to
mm-hmm.
tell, and you should pick the pursuit that best fits it.
Yeah, it's helping craft into something specific.
Yeah, exactly.
Fit the theme,
So a pursuit is basically, like I said, a temporary character class that you're going to wear for the span of an adventure. You may wear them multiple adventures in a row as fate or circumstance
mm-hmm.
might have it. So there's nothing wrong. You don't have to change, but you're encouraged to
shift into that role.
To shop around,
yeah.
And it may be something as simple as, like, you're a gunslinger.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, or you're an academic,
mm-hmm.
or you're a, a con man, or
mm-hmm. the face, or whatever.
There's a lot of different pursuits,
mm-hmm.
and each one will offer you a pursuit talent,
mm-hmm.
which is basically a special ability that you only get while you have that pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
So if you change, you don't get to keep it.
Right.
But while you're a pursuit, you get to use that pursuit's advancement track.
Mm-hmm.
So I play a game as a gunslinger. At the end of it, I'm awarded some XP. I can use that XP to advance, and because I'm currently a gunslinger, I can look at the gunslinger advancement track and pick up talents off of those.
Mm-hmm.
And those I do keep. Now, next game, when I decide I'm going to be an academic, because the storyteller tells us we're not getting into a lot of combat, this one's going to be a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Obviously, being a gunslinger is not a great idea.
Right.
My combat abilities aren't going to be used.
Mm-hmm.
So what else can my character do? What aspects of my character are there that I could lean into that would help them solve a mystery?
Right.
Well, maybe as a, I'm also a student of warfare
mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. So I took the academic pursuit for this adventure. I get to keep the talent that I bought off of the gunslinger track last turn, but I don't get the gunslinger's pursuit talent.
Right, the bonus talent, yeah.
But I do now get the academic pursuit talent.
Right.
And at the end of this, if I want, I can spend my XP to buy an academic talent.
Yeah, rounding out your character even further.
Exactly. Now, what this does is it makes it so that you're not stuck in one character class.
Mm-hmm.
How many times playing Dungeons & Dragons have you been playing, like, the fighter?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, we're talking right now, and my character doesn't have any good skills for talking because they're the fighter. Let me know when we get into combat, and you sit there on your phone twiddling your thumbs, waiting for your turn to come around.
Right.
This guarantees that's not going to happen. Because I tell you right now, we're not getting into combat. Do you want to be something other than the fighter?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd love to be the bard. Cool. You're the bard this time around.
Mm-hmm.
And you get bonuses to talking. Let's go on an adventure.
Yep, exactly.
Uh-huh.
So it's a different way of doing it, and I really like that concept.
Really, really like the concept.
Yeah. I could see that making its way into other games.
And pursuit tracks are only 10 steps.
Mm-hmm.
So at a certain point, especially if you're playing a longer campaign, you have to change.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you stayed there for 10 whole things, like, you don't get any bonuses after that.
Right.
You're done.
Right.
You're the best gunslinger you're going to be.
Right.
Pick something else, you know?
Yep. It's time to bend some other direction.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but I like that. I like the way that the system wraps around the cards in both the character creation and then takes those right to gameplay in the way that the system works. Now, I kind of don't want to lean too far into the mechanics of the system, of how the Duels of Fate get into things, because I think we could get pretty deep. And it you almost need a representation to really get it. I think we could get lost in the podcast here a little bit too much.
I mean, it's basically attribute plus skill plus you flip the top card of the deck.
Right.
There's some modifiers that act a little bit like advantage and disadvantage, where you'll flip more cards and choose the best one for you.
Some cards...
Or flip more cards and choose the worst, and the storyteller will choose the worst one for you out of it.
There's also the suits may trigger certain things.
Yeah, sometimes you'll have triggers, or sometimes, like, especially for spells and stuff like that, you'll have a suit requirement. So it's not just enough that your attribute plus skill plus card flip exceed a 10, but it also has to have a crow.
Right. So now you've got to make a decision there. Sometimes you decide not to succeed, but you do want the trigger. Yeah. So you might have a combat ability that, like, not only does your gun do damage, but if you flip a crow or you flip a ram, it might push them back or knock them down or something, Right. And that's where the Twisted deck can come in, because you basically have fate cards effectively that you can swap.
Yeah, you've got your own little deck,
or at least a hand.
It's 13 cards, of which you'll have probably 3 to 5 in your hand at any given time, which you can use to twist fate. And so basically you flip the top card in the fate deck and you say, I don't want that one. Yeah. I'm going to use this one out of my hand that I know what it is, so I know what it's going to do. Right. But that's a limited resource. And it's a bit like using, like, bennies or fate dice.
That's how I kind of see it as well.
Or fate tokens if you're playing fate. Yeah. To kind of get, like, a predictable boost of outcome by expending a resource. And again, you might not always want the highest number. Right. I might forego a 15 to swap it out for a 10 just so I can get the correct suit to get a trigger.
Exactly, which is what I was kind of addressing before.
Yeah.
And then if we even step away from those mechanics for a second and the cards there, because I do want to talk a little bit about how the magic system kind of falls under Savage World a little bit in the way that you craft your magic.
Oh yeah.
It's not like D&D. You have a set number of spells. You can't really alter them except for an empower or reduce or whatever. This lets you basically take 2 statements and plug them together.
Right. So there's a bunch of magical theories. Everybody has to have a magical theory, and these work a little bit like arcane backgrounds in Savage Worlds.
Or schools of magic.
How you came about learning your magic.
Right.
And this can be anywhere from those whispers from the Grave Spirit all the way up to literally Oxford. Like Oxford, Mississippi, it's the Oxford method. You just, there's one called the court procedure.
Which is neat.
Really, that I loved. It's like 8,000 different precepts broken down into 11 gates that they call. And you have to, it has to be self-taught. There are no, like, schools for court procedure.
Yeah.
And you have to like learn it yourself. And essentially, if you can learn it enough to exceed the first gate, congratulations, you get to join the secret society.
Yeah.
And then maybe they'll offer you some other resources.
Someone will recognize you. Yeah.
They'll give you some other resources so you can do the rest of the work your damn self.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
'Cause if you're not powerful and smart enough to learn it yourself, you shouldn't be learning it.
Right. But all of them use the Magia and Amaru?
Magia and Immuto.
Okay. I always get those wrong.
So Magia is what the spell does.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just your raw sort of stuff, like
damage, healing,
healing,
push,
you know, things like that. Immuto is how the spell is unique. What changes that spell from its raw form? So you can do like, but only to inanimate objects, or and extra damage against undead, or and also paralyzes the target. You know, and so by sticking together a Magia and an Immuto, you not only get, like, the total components of what you need to cast that spell, but it also makes it uniquely yours.
Right.
And there's a lot of Magia. There's a lot of Immuto. And effectively limitless combinations you can make there.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously some things work better with some other things and stuff like that, but, like, I was really impressed reading over the magic system and how flexible it is.
Yeah, I mean, and I like when systems are more open like that give you a toolkit, because you're no longer bent on flipping pages and trying to memorize. You know, it's yours. It's going to be different than theirs, and it makes for that. Oh, I know what that spell is. It will only ever do X.
Yeah.
No, it won't.
No,
you don't know.
You have no idea what's going to happen when Seamus starts using necromancy next to what Dr. McMorning using necromancy looks like.
Right, exactly.
You know?
Totally different.
They're both resurrectionists, but they have completely different spells working for them. You know,
and that's fantastic. That kind of reminds me of going back to early days of D&D, where you literally had, like, you learned thaumaturgy, or you learned, or necromancy or evocation or abjuration. Like, that was your school. And so when you saw another school, you may not know what they're going to do with it.
Yeah.
But this opens that kicks that door wide open.
Yeah, it does. It really does. So what do we do well? What does Through the Breach do well for us?
I would say for me, it opens up another world, a world building. It gives us another kind of, I guess, a mainstream product, but I would say more of a mainstream world to play off of. And I think that's great. I think that's a wonderful gift to give new storytellers who are creative, but they don't want to craft a whole world.
Oh, yeah.
They don't mind putting, individuals in that world, and coming up with unique stories, but they need something to clamp onto, and especially when they can hand that data to someone else and look it over and be like, oh, I know this rich world with these people, there's this big bad guy and this big bad guy. And that's a fantastic thing, especially when the book has such rich, vivid imagery.
Oh, it really does. The artwork is great. The models look just like the artwork.
Right.
So, like, and the models are phenomenal for this line. And the thing that I really like about their world building is that it's so unique. Like, I really can't, like, other than, like, maybe Deadlands, I can't think of any other setting that even comes close to feeling like Malifaux does.
Not in this broadness. Yeah. Not in this broadness. There are some new stuff that is definitely coming out, but nothing at that time period, definitely, and nothing with the same distinction level. And because of that, I see a lot of potential for some great storytelling that people can have, because again, it gives them a punk, not like a steampunk opera kind of thing, but you could do everything from steampunk to dieselpunk to anything, and it does it in a fantasy setting. Still, it's still fantasy. It's still fun. It's still magic. It still tickles that edge. If you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that I'd like to about it is the scalability of the setting. In that it offers you some really great plot hooks for, like, if you want to keep things down home in the city of Malifaux, and play like a Hell's Kitchen sort of like, this whole story takes place in 4 city blocks.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Yeah.
Malifaux, the city, has enough stuff going on that you could absolutely tell that story that takes place in 4 city blocks, but at the same time, you've got that broad frontier out there.
Yep.
All that unexplored, and even inside the city, there's quarantine zones and stuff like that. So,
Yep.
Lots of scalability.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, the other thing that's really great for me is because I actually started playing the skirmish game a handful of years ago. I think when it was first edition.
Yeah.
It's in its 3rd edition now. But the rules, the 2nd edition rules for Through the Breach, are basically an expanded version of the rules for 2nd edition Malifaux.
Okay.
Now they're on 3rd edition Malifaux now, but I guess the changes have been pretty minor. There's some balance tweaks and stuff like that. But so I would say about 90% of the rules should translate from one to the other very quickly.
So you'll feel it very comfortably.
If you play the skirmish game and want to get into Through the Breach, you will look at Through the Breach as a expanded version of the rules you're already playing with.
Yeah.
If you're playing Through the Breach and that tickles your fancy about the Malifaux setting and you want to play Malifaux the skirmish game, you will look at the rules like a reduced version of Through the Breach.
Yeah. And in that sense, it's another minis game you can shift to if you're being currently upset about another manufacturer of minis games.
Yeah, if you're boycotting GW, I'm going to come right out and say it.
Yeah.
If you're boycotting GW currently for their interesting takes on fan-created content,
there might be a drift.
Give a look at Wyrd Games.
Yeah.
Now, it's got a very low barrier of entry.
The minis are also painted.
No.
They're still unpainted?
Oh, yeah, they're very unpainted.
Okay. And that was one of the things I couldn't remember is if they come painted or unpainted. And that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Quality minis is always a good thing.
And the detail on them is amazing.
Right.
Now, the one thing you do have to be ready for is that they're very small and very intricate. I pulled out my Take Back the Night box because I talked to Big Game about having Molly Squidpidge and her crew. I haven't taken her out of the box. I haven't clipped her off of the sprue yet. The entire crew is on one sprue because they're that small.
Yeah.
And the sprue is like, I don't know, what would you say that is, 7 inches by 5 inches?
If that, yeah.
If that, yeah. The pieces are, it's not heroic scale, okay? And when I say heroic scale is like, you know how like you look at a Games Workshop miniature and it looks like the head is big, the hands are big, the body is very stocky, because it gives it that sort of that bulky proportions, kind of makes it look a little heroic. These are realistic scale.
Right.
So if you were to shrink an actual person down, think of how teeny tiny the little fingers would be. That's how big they are.
Yeah, the eyes, the face, the I remember the Gremlins.
Yeah.
Seeing some of the detail in the Gremlins, they're beautiful, but my God, are they small?
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, but the plastic is also very sturdy and stuff like that. So
yes.
They've moved from pewter to plastic minis,
which is huge.
They're all digitally sculpted and stuff like that. So they're amazing mini line.
So what's your issue with it?
All right. So I liked the prophecy thing, like on its surface, but the more I started to think about it, the harder it was for me to wrap my head around it. Coming from a storyteller standpoint, advancement based on a vague prophecy could be confusing to players, as if not your storyteller. Like,
well, and that's I think the same problem we ran into with Mouse Guard.
Yeah,
where you're like, I need to have a goal, and you kind of make up a goal, and you're like, can I do this? Did I do it right?
Get from point A to point B safely? Is that too cheesy? Like,
is that too general?
No, that's what your mission is.
Yeah, but now that's written by somebody else. So now it gets even weirder.
Yeah, exactly. And then so now you have to try to shoehorn these weird things in, which I mean, I guess is an excuse to like delve into some of the weirder aspects of the game system in the world and stuff like that. But it does put an extra level of stress on people to just imagine the unimaginable and then make a story out of it, you know?
Well, I think the other aspect of that is that for the players who do want a specific character design, you can't necessarily have a specific character design.
Maybe not.
You end up with, this backstory, with this forestory, Yeah, I mean, you got to pick some of the aspects of it, but there's a lot of this you don't.
Yeah.
And I think
absolutely.
that can be off-putting to some of the players, definitely.
The Fate deck can also be off-putting to some players. I know we're all used to dice and stuff like that, so it can be a little weird shifting over to just purely cards.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even Savage Worlds still has dice as its backbone.
Right.
And cards are only used for a couple things. But,
right. But I think people are getting more comfortable with cards in systems.
So, yeah.
I think they're showing up a lot more in games. And it's not a direct carryover from the skirmish game. It's close.
It's close, but it's obviously expanded to turn itself into something a lot more free than just victory conditions between three models, you know.
Yeah. And I know you took a little issue with the world building. Not necessarily issue with it, but how everything sits within the book.
Yeah, the blessing and the curse of Malifaux as a setting is that it has a lot of really rich and colorful dramatis personae that move the story around you, and that the world all kind of revolves around them. And I think that's really great for a skirmish minis game because it gives you a lot of like cool crew leaders to pick, and gives each individual crew kind of a really cool feel and flavor to how that crew runs on the table. But when you come down to a role-playing game, there's a danger that all your stories will just revolve around these dramatis personae, and unless you do it right, unless you tell that story in a correct way, you run the risk of your story just being a story about these dramatis personae NPC, and your player characters just kind of exist in the same world.
Well, we talked about that. There are definitely game systems that are world-centric and that are character-centric.
Yeah.
And this is definitely a world-centric game, without a doubt. The one thing that I will say to that is that 7th Sea is very much that as well. I see that, you've got a rich world around 7th Sea with rich characters that all you have heroes and villains and kind of gray people as well, spies and such, in a complete setting that is in multiple countries, sometimes down to some very direct individuals who are there that you have to interact with. One of the things is, to master something in 7th Sea, you have to go seek a master, and their name is in the book.
Yeah.
So the idea of a player being able to come up with these other things and fill in the gaps, or a storyteller to be able to do that, kind of pigeonholes you in a direction. But I've actually found it kind of freeing in that sense.
Yeah. It's freeing because all that work is done for you of coming up with who the movers and shakers are, so you they're defined, so you know how to run between them, and you know when it's important when they show up.
Right. But the other thing that I liked about that 7th Sea really did well was that the players could read through the countries. Mm-hmm. They knew the names of the players.
Yeah.
So when one of those players came in, one of those NPCs came in,
you can literally go, "Oh crap, that's King Louis,"
exactly.
Or whatever,
oh, what
crap,
the heck is he
that's
doing?
Alvago,
Yeah. When you see a ship with bloody red sails sailing towards you at a high speed with a madman with wild hair and a sickle on the front.
Didn't I kill that guy's lieutenant or something?
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah. So, when Krace comes to get you, you know who Krace is.
Uh-huh.
And that kind of momentum is hard to get when you're building everything.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to be said for it, but at the same time, I totally get where it could feel like the DM's playing their own game.
Yeah, exactly.
I totally get that.
And I've been in those games before, and they're utterly miserable.
I think that's just something you have to learn as a storyteller, because you could run in the same mistake in D&D just as easily in like Waterdeep.
You've got Elminster and Fist and Dantalus and
everybody,
the Unmasked Lord and all that. Yeah, I get it.
There's so much lore out there.
Knox in the Box says in the live chat asking, was there a scaling problem with this game? Don't players get noticeably stronger after every game? In a sense, they do. It's not really suggested that you play like 5-year-long campaigns with the same characters.
Yeah.
It definitely is for like a short to medium run campaign if you're going to play that. I don't remember hearing anything saying that there were scaling problems, but it does say in the book that after a while, your advancement's going to really cap out, and so don't aim for a 78 session. Like, you're not going to see a Critical Role campaign done.
I was reading that
that you're dealing
episodes. With between a total of 10 to a maximum of like 20 sessions.
Yes.
And you're done.
Yes.
If your story isn't done by 20 sessions as a storyteller, or not necessarily sessions, but story arcs.
Yeah.
Beats, if you will, where XP is doled out, you did something wrong.
Yeah, and it might be a level of scaling too, and that's probably why they say to do something short enough like that, because they recognize that there's a cap to scaling on there.
Yeah.
But I think that's okay though. I mean, like, we're a lot of us are busy adults nowadays. We've only got so much time to go, and like in doing research for this game, I was actually hearing that brought up as one of the selling points of it, is that it's not a game that expects you to play it from first to 20th level every week for the next 5 years. Like, who can commit to that?
No.
No, play it for like the next 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's the whole game.
Yeah, get into it, enjoy it, tell a story,
and get the hell out. Yeah.
And if you like it, do a different one.
Right.
Yeah. Shadowrun tends to feel the same way because the build-up goal isn't the same.
Yeah.
It's not there. So, like, yeah, you go on these runs because you want to finish the story, not because your character needs to level. And I like game systems that lean in that direction. That's always been something really cool. So, speaking of questions.
Yeah, we have a couple questions.
Let's start with Overwatch.
All right. So Overwatch asks, is there a non-standard mechanic other than the typical dice rolling that you've seen in a game system that you would like to see catch on? Alternatively, is there one that you've seen that is just bad and would have been best left on the drawing board?
There's a lot of different systems that we've gone over that are different. I like card systems. I think they're getting different. Not only that they're not just playing cards. Sometimes there's other elements in it. Savage Worlds has elements that are different than a standard deck. This game kind of uses a standard deck, but has its own little mechanics that it throws in with the suits being different. I think the difficulty that you have with doing anything that is a non-standard mechanic is that we as a society and as humanity have gone through so many different ways to deal out fate or randomness that it's hard to find something that's not standard. Standard to our system is dice, coin, card, and that's about it.
Yeah.
I mean, once you start moving into the realms of, like, Jenga towers...
Yep.
Or...
You knew that was going to come up.
I knew that was going to come up, without a doubt. I saw someone who had built an RPG around a road trip. It was meant for kids.
Okay.
And it basically kind of created personal bingo cards that had to do with road trip stuff.
Okay.
And that was your mechanic for Fate, because the driver was effectively the coordinating storyteller.
Sure.
Everybody else in the car was playing this game, and mechanics came off of that. It had to do with what was coming on the radio next. You'd just basically hit scan, and based on the song and the type of song that it was, or if it was a commercial, would determine things.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's a random way of handling things. It's a different mechanic. I don't necessarily think it was a great mechanic. You could definitely run into some issues with that. But at the same time, it was different and unique and even more random than you could say than dice even to that degree. But because it's you're not totally out of control of it.
Yeah.
It is now truly random what's going to happen there. And they even had rules for static. So I thought that was a different way of looking at things, and I thought that was kind of neat, but it's also to a specific setting. You've got to be in a car. You've got to be with the people that way.
Yeah.
So I think as far as, for me, non-standard mechanics that I would like to see in other systems catch on, I would have to say that I would like to see more card-like.
That's what I was going to say.
Stuff.
That was what I was going to say. I remember watching Undeadwood which was a 4-part miniseries Deadlands game that the Critical Role crew threw together with Brian Wayne Foster, actually, fiance of Ashley Johnson and host of Talks Machina, their after show. Actually, is a phenomenal storyteller. Tells an amazing Deadlands tale. And one of the mechanics, and I'll be dead honest, as much as I'm into Savage Worlds right now, I don't know if this is, because I'm not familiar with the Deadlands setting. And I know there's like some custom rules from it's not core Suede. It's Deadlands is its own kind of like based on Savage Worlds rules.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is core Deadlands or if this is just something they did for the one shot. But like when they were doing spells, they would deal a poker hand, and it was like a 1-person game of Texas Hold'em.
Interesting.
Where you could gamble to see if you wanted to like push your extra power points or something like that into it, and if not, then you would get overload. So you would never roll your spell casting or your miracle or your faith skill or something like that to cast. It was always a hand of poker if you wanted to cast a spell.
Interesting.
And I really liked that. I mean, obviously it would slow the gameplay down, and so you really only wanted to use it for dramatic purposes. So having like 3 spellcasters in a group of 6 people, it would get really tedious to do that. But for a smaller group where magic is a rare and very special thing, I really, really, really liked it.
Okay.
And I'd love to see more applications of cards. The main reason I want to see more applications of cards is because it's randomization without replacement.
Yes.
And mathematically, that's important. Because like on a D6 or a D20, you can roll a 20. And that doesn't mean that you can't roll a 20 again.
Right.
That 20 is still there. So so it's with replacement. Okay. The next time it gets random, the 20 is replaced into the set. Okay.
Right. It's not a diminishing set.
Right. Without replacement means if I pull the King of Hearts, that King of Hearts goes into a discard pile. Now, first off, it's not a 1 in 54 chance anymore. It's a 1 in 53 chance.
Right.
And the King of Hearts is a 0 probability for being drawn.
Right.
Because it's sitting on the table. And so every single card that comes out of that deck changes the probability of every other card in that deck at that point.
Until they're all reshuffled.
Exactly. And that fascinates me.
Yeah.
Shifting probabilities.
Yeah. It's definitely different, and it's definitely a neat way of handling it. So, all right. So then Knox asks, with the comfort most players, especially new players at tabletop, have with dice-based systems, do you find that unconventional game systems such as this, or like Dread with its Jenga tower, have a hard time maintaining a lifespan amongst the communities? What do you think might help ease this discomfort? I honestly don't think that's the problem.
Yeah, I don't think
I think that D&D saturated a market.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
You go to Germany and you don't have D&D saturation.
No, you have Shadowrun saturation.
Right.
You go to Japan, you have Call of Cthulhu saturation.
Right. So I think that's a local cultural shift.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to England, you have GW saturation in many ways.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we're seeing here is it's purely based upon the marketing and the acceptance within the area.
Yeah, I think Dungeons and Dragons has a legacy name going for it, and then major properties like Critical Role, Dimension 20, My Brother and Me, Adventure Zone has pushed D&D even further into the mainstream.
Yeah,
and so you've got this influx of new players right now, and D&D is very fashionable.
Yeah,
right now.
See, what's interesting to me is, I bet if we have this conversation again in a year, we're going to hear a lot more about Powered by the Apocalypse.
Oh yeah, I bet, especially with the Kickstarter that was that just went live.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Did you see the funding on it, by the way?
I haven't looked at all.
Okay, so what I'm referring to, and I posted this up on the Discord for those of you who were there. Is the Avatar: The Last Airbender Kickstarter went live. Magpie Games, who we previously featured with Apillion, a dragon epic.
Yes.
Who make Powered by the Apocalypse styled games got the license for Avatar: The Last Airbender role-playing game.
And everybody jumped on that
50,000 goal. It was at 4.3 million when I last looked earlier today.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I'm all for it. I have nothing against Magpie at all. In fact, I know them. Like I'm familiar with some of the staff. They're probably going nuts right now.
Oh, I bet.
Which is great. I mean, how is it not going to go nuts? But at the same time, this is not D&D.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my thought is, how long is it going to be before Critical Role or somebody up there gets a hold of a copy of this and starts running it? Because that's going to happen in the marketing play.
I actually think we're kind of starting to see it too. Like it's already kind of happening. Because floating around on the tabletop RPG YouTube sphere, I've been seeing a handful of other typically D&D YouTubers and stuff like that going like, hey, unpopular opinion time, but I don't think D&D is the greatest role-playing game that's ever existed. I know, please don't lynch me, but I got a hold of this game called Monster of the Week, and it's stupidly fun, and I think this is my favorite game now. I've seen that. Looking at major properties like Dimension 20 from College Humor, are recently playing a game called Mischief and Magic. Magic and Misfits? I can't remember exactly how it goes, but and that's based off of Kids on Broomsticks, which is itself based off of Kids on Bikes by Renegade Games. It's, again, its own game system, Yeah. I think what we're starting to see is, we had this initial swell of popularity for a couple years off of Dungeons & Dragons.
Right.
And I think as Dungeons & Dragons is starting to kind of become mainstream and wash out, the people who came in with the big tide of oh my god, D&D is the new hot now, are starting to now go, cool, what else is out there?
Right.
And so I think we're right on the verge of that sort of maybe other games are going to start flickering through the vogue.
And that's the thing that I'm saying is that D&D right now is only backed as far as large companies go for marketing stuff by themselves. They're getting a boost from all of the side marketing that's happening through these other channels.
Yeah.
Critical Role, some support on YouTube, people being able to create content for them and things like that. But Avatar as a system has Nickelodeon, YouTube, Netflix, and Disney.
Oh, yeah. Disney?
Disney.
Okay.
Disney owns which aspect of it? I got to think about this for a second.
The art studio?
No, the movie rights.
Okay.
So because it's 20th Century Fox, Walt Disney.
Gotcha.
So you have all these players who all want this to be successful. And all it's going to take is positioning of the outside players who are slightly and variedly attached to those groups by, actors who worked with this group, voice actors over here. You take two of the Avatar voice actors and you throw them into Critical Role and give them the books. Suddenly that explodes, and now My Cabbages is being said by everyone who loves Critical Role.
Yeah.
Or whoever else on YouTube does it. Or Netflix produces their own series that follows along the live action series that they're producing.
Yeah.
And it explodes. Now everybody's playing Powered by the Apocalypse and playing all of these other games that go along with that aren't Avatar The Last Airbender, because that's just one franchise. Look at all these other games. You could be doing more adult games, and boom, now it's back in. Now that's in the mainstream.
Yeah, I think so.
So I think a year from now we may, depending on how the marketing hits, we may have a very different story, and D&D may have an uphill battle. I don't think they're going to lose their mainstream players in any way.
Nobody's going to dethrone D&D, I think.
Not in the least, but I think the eye of the of the horse blinds will be pointed in a new direction for a little while.
If nothing else, I think it's going to equalize a little bit, and D&D won't have 90% of the market share. They'll only have 60% of the market share, and that other 30% will be freed up a lot, and other people's games will be
which I look forward to.
Will be out there. Yeah,
I really look forward to.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think it was great when we had the swell in the early convention times of the early 80s and early or middle 80s to the 90s.
Yeah.
There was some great convention time there where some wonderful games came out, and then there was this huge swell that Games Workshop stepped in. Mm-hmm. And Games Workshop made a big push and took over a bunch of stuff, and D&D kind of foibled with 3rd edition and 3.5, and we're trying to figure themselves out in 4th edition. So there was a lot of confusion. So they basically went quiet for a while until they were prepared to do something else. And a lot of things came out during the time. Shadowrun had a big push.
Vampire, the World of Darkness had a huge push right there. Yeah, huge push right there. That was the ubiquitous game in those days. At least in my circle of friends. Yeah. Nobody gave a crap about D&D. It was all World of Darkness.
Yeah, and so I think we're going to see that again. I think we're going to see that curve swell again, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, I'm absolutely excited for it. Absolutely excited for it. So.
All right. Let me go ahead and get us rolling. I know we went over, so we kind of froze things up. Let me go grab that real quick. So what's next?
Our next week's topic is going to be it's a bit of a storyteller's rant. Some things we wanted to say, some things we wanted to maybe get off our chest. So this is an open letter to players, not our players, just players in general. A storyteller's lament.
I mean, we're not going to be rude about this. We're not, but some of it may come off as a little bit ranty.
Yeah, the workshop title for this was "Players Get Your Shit Together."
Yeah, and it is the whole Morty get your shit together, get it all together,
put it all in a bag,
take it to the shit store.
Yeah,
just get your shit together.
So yeah, it may come off as a little ranty. It's not pointed at anyone. We're just sometimes storytellers got to.
You can find us on Twitter at @ST_conclave, on Instagram at @ST_conclave. On Mixlr Wednesdays, you can listen to us record at 7 p.m. on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. You can find the link to our Discord, which a few people joined from our Twitter, or you can go to our website, storytellerconclave.com.
I want to thank our Patreon members, Knox in the Box, Sam, Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, Vedran, Hulavu. Thank you so much for supporting the show week after week, month after month. You really help us keep our head above water here and keep the show coming. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on Google Music. And our outro music playing now is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that up on freemusicarchive.org.
We'd like to give a special thanks to our families, Vicky and Sean, for supporting us through doing all of these shows and listening to us rant about things at times. And all of our friends who have come together when we're running our games to help us learn what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right. And you, our listeners, thank you.
We love you so much.
Good night.
Good night.